Hi, Sandy. Thank you so much for joining us today for one of our final Black History Month panels. We're really excited to have you, and I'm excited for this conversation that we'll have today. But before I get into the questions, I just want to acknowledge that I'm primarily located in Toronto, which is the traditional unceded territory or the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples that are covered by Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaty, and emphasizing how our work as Black organizers are interconnected with Indigenous self-determination, and how, our struggle for liberation on stolen land should always include space for Indigenous people's fight for self-determination. And I know that's something that we strongly emphasize in our activism with Black Lives Matter Canada. So I want to first give you an opportunity to kind of tell us about yourself, and what motivated you to pursue kind of activism and organizing.
Sure. Thank you so much, Hudson, and it's my pleasure to join you. And I will also start just by saying that I'm coming to you from a place called Tovangar, which is the traditional territories of the Tongva people of the Los Angeles Basin. It has been colonized as Los Angeles, which is probably what most people who hear this will recognize it as. But I do agree with you that I think it is very important that as we do this work for social justice, any sort of work that is engaged in eradicating injustice, that we locate ourselves, how we got to be here. And how I got to be in this land is, of course, filled with histories of violence against Indigenous peoples and my people as well. And I think that that needs to be central in the work that we do. How did I start organizing? It was actually because I had I experienced some injustice myself. Like my first foray into organizing came as a result of when I started my undergraduate degree. I thought that I was going to be a software engineer. And I entered school in computer programming, which is something that I had some talent in. And I didn't know much about post-secondary education when I started because I was the first in my family to go to school. And I discovered that after my first year, the tuition fees at the school that I was at were going to go up significantly by like almost triple. And I was like, wait, but
Immediately no.
I didn't know this. I was already getting the maximum OSAP. I had 3 jobs. It was already a struggle. And I was like, I can't, like, there's absolutely no way that I can make this work and afford the transportation to get to school. Like, it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. And I went to my students union honestly looking for some money. I was like, hey, can I please get a grant or a bursary or something? Somebody help me. And they were like, we don't have any of that, but we are doing a rally next week. I was very, very skeptical. But they invited me to an organizing meeting, which made me even more skeptical because I was like, there's like 10 people in this room. How do you expect to have a rally at Queen's Park that is going to do anything? I go to the rally and there were about 5,000 to 10,000 people there. I can't remember, it was a long time ago, but it was February too, so it was snowing and there were that many people there. And the week afterwards, the government announced a tuition fee freeze. So while that didn't help me for the program that I was in, I was like, how did you 10 people? I want to learn this. This is what I want to know how to do, because if I can't do what I want to do, which is the software engineering program, which in the end, thank God, I suppose. But if I can't do what I want to do, then I want to learn how to change it so that other students who are younger than me Like I was thinking of my little brother who was 7 years younger than me, don't have to go through this. So I threw all of my attention at that point into learning how to organize. And here we are.
Wow. Um, what a impactful story. I mean, so many things speak to me. One, the power of organizing and bringing people together, and how we can influence policy and change through that. But I really liked what you kind of mentioned around what motivated you to pursue organizing further was kind of thinking forward to the next generation and the people that will come after you, and what you can do today to make it more livable for them. And I think that just speaks to a lot of the work that our ancestors have done for us today. So you're currently pursuing your JD at UCLA School of Law. What do you hope to achieve with a law degree? Or how do you see using your law degree in this space or any other space, if at all? Do you think it's possible? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a really good question, and one that I've struggled with throughout my experience here at law school. Coming into it, I knew that I might feel unwilling to practice at the end. I knew that that was a possibility. And so I always had my sights set on, if I end up not liking this and I don't want to practice, then I'll be an academic. That was kind of always the backup. And I think that, I have some papers that should be published this year that I'm really proud of, that
Wow.
that I think will impact some of the ways that we think about things like policing and in the United States, reproductive justice. And I'm proud of those things. But, I did a number of internships. I did an internship at a big law firm. I did an internship at the ACLU, and I did some experiential learning in criminal defense. And I think that the learning experience has been unbelievably valuable to understanding the way that our world works and the structures that kind of uphold a lot of the ways that injustice acts upon different people. But I think I've decided that practicing is not for me. It doesn't appear to be the best use of my skill set, given everything that I know about organizing. And so I am thinking very deeply about what I want to do with the knowledge next, because the knowledge is the knowledge of how the law works and how to think about law, I think is too sparse. There are too few people who understand how it all works. I think the law is a very opaque thing. You don't really know what you don't know until you get into it and understand what it is and how it works. And so I think I've been talking to another organizer, a friend of mine who is an alum of Osgood, about potentially starting a advocacy organization that is meant to just change the way the law works. Because I think that there are too many things that we take for granted that are coming from like this kind of ancient monarchical way of doing things that are based on the king is always right. And there's a lot of things that I think about the way that the law works that absolutely needs to change. The change is too slow. And of course, the legal community and the judiciary are very resistant to change. And I don't see many organizations that have that sort of, in fact, I don't see any organization that has that focus. There are a lot of law-based organizations that are based on working within the law to change things like the CCLA, the ACLU, but I don't see organizations that are like, hey, why is it like this? Why is it like this at all? And can we change this altogether? So that's what I'm thinking right now. We'll see.
I mean, we're not stagnant, right? So, or interests change, and we can try different things out and see how it works. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about studying the law, is because having a law degree is so adaptable to so many different fields and professions. But I really liked how you kind of highlighted, using your skills and interests to enact change, and you recognize where your skills are, where your interests lie, and finding a way to use that for social change. And I also like how you mentioned, around interrogating the foundations of the law, why things are the way they are, instead of accepting it at face value. And I love the idea of that organization. So please do it. So you kind of touched on, what inspired you to get into activism, but let's get a little specific. We want to hear what inspired you to start Black Lives Matter Toronto, and by extension Black Lives Matter Canada in recent years, and why is it important to have these organizations in the Canadian context?
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar story. I think, in 2014, folks will remember, hopefully, that that was the year that Michael Brown was shot and killed by Officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri. And that became a worldwide piece of news. People were furious at what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, at the fact that Michael Brown's body was left laying in the street for so long, and the circumstances surrounding that case. And I certainly was one of those people. A month earlier, or just shortly before, Jermaine Carby, who is a man from Brampton, Ontario, was shot and killed by Officer Ryan Reed. If you were in Toronto at that time, or in Canada at that time, you would have seen scores and scores of news programs and information about Michael Brown, and rightfully so. That is something that I think is, essential to be covered by the Canadian media. But there was next to no coverage of what happened to Jermaine Carby. And what made it even stranger was that what happened to Jermaine Carby was weird. There were strange circumstances in the case. Jermaine Carby was shot in the back. The police said that he threatened them with a knife, but when the Special Investigations Unit arrived on the scene, there was no knife. The police said that they had brought it back to their evidence locker. That is not permitted. They're not allowed to do that. The SIU allowed them to just go and bring it back, and they brought back a serrated kitchen knife, a steak knife, that didn't match any of the knives in Jermaine Carby's home. So, there's a lot of weird circumstances about this case, but it wasn't being reported on in the way that Michael Brown's case was being reported on. So that's context. In November of that year, so shortly after these incidents, activists in the United States put out a call for people to have solidarity actions around the world, at US consulates, demanding that the grand jury indict Officer Darren Wilson. I was at the time looking to see who's going to do this in Toronto. I'm looking for the event, and I couldn't find any. And I was calling all of the people that I knew, just saying, have you seen who's doing the solidarity rally in Toronto? And I couldn't find anything. Nobody else seemed to know anything. And this made me really upset. And I remember that I was on the phone with my brother, again, I was on the phone with my brother, and, he was also very, very upset at that turn of events. And just before we hung up the phone that day, he said, I want to also let you know, though, that I'm kind of annoyed with you too. And I was like, what are you talking about? Why are you annoyed with me? And he's like, you've been doing activism work for how many years now? At that point, it had been almost 10 years. He's like, you've been You've had all of these rallies on tuition fees. You know how to organize things. What exactly are you waiting for? Like, if nobody else is doing it, why wouldn't you do it? And I had all of these excuses came up in my head almost right away. I was like, well, I'm not the expert on policing. Like, I don't, I've not done that before. This is different. Like, I have a sector, I have a space that I do this work in, and this isn't it. And then, but the more I started to argue with myself, really, the more none of those things really seemed to make sense. They just felt like excuses. And I thought, he was right. Like, what a challenge. I do have these skills. What am I waiting for? So at that point, it was about a week before these solidarity actions were supposed to take place. I called everyone that I knew who was an organizer and just said, like, would you help? Like, could we try to do something? And people were overwhelmingly positive in wanting to support some sort of action in Toronto, but not just Toronto. Because I had been involved in the Canadian student movement, there were people across the country who were like, yeah, let's do this. And so, with only 2 days left, we created some materials. We contacted the Germaine Carby family, because now that we were the ones who were going to be doing this, we could ensure that these local issues were central to the way that we were going to approach the issue. And they were very grateful. Latanya Grant, Germaine Carby's cousin, was like, I will speak. I have been wanting to get this issue out. And that's how we approached doing the rally. And, at that point, I had been an experienced organizer for, as I said, almost a decade. And I knew that we had organized something for maybe 50 people to show up. We just didn't have enough time to make it large. But 3,000 people showed up, which
Wow.
told me, with 2 days notice, which told me that other people were doing what I was doing. They were waiting and they were trying to find, like, who's the people who are going to do this. And that made it very clear that people in the city were looking for something like this, a mobilization force that was going to bring these ideas to the forefront and make it impossible to ignore. So afterwards, we had a conversation and just thought it would be unethical for us not to continue as an organization if we just let things end at a solidarity rally when there's so many issues locally that need to be addressed. So that's BLM Toronto. BLM Canada, which we started up a few years ago, comes as a result of seeing all of these other chapters start to pop up all over Canada, and wanting to make sure that some of the struggles that we went through in starting BLM Toronto, financially, training ourselves in how to, deal with media, how to deal with hostile white supremacists, how to deal with the finances of an organization. We wanted to make sure that other organizations didn't have to struggle like we did. We wanted to give people a starting place. And we also knew that it is easier to fundraise in Toronto than it might be to fundraise in St. John's, Newfoundland, Labrador. We wanted to spread the resources around so that we could make Black organizing sustainable across the country. And so that is the impetus for starting BLM Canada. There's most of what we do is a lot of training and teaching and distributing resources. And I think so far it's going all right. And hopefully we can, make that goal of Black organizing and making it sustainable a reality for us, because I think we really need it.
Wow. That story is just so impactful, and particularly I'm thinking about, the pre-law students who will be listening to this, and the message you sent about, everyone is kind of looking for the person who will start the revolution or do the right thing, and you could be that person. And if you see that something's wrong or a problem, you can be the one that fixes it, or starts the conversation, or lead the movement towards fixing it. And I think that's really powerful, that if we all took responsibility for a small problem in the world, there'd be no problems because everyone would take accountability for them instead of waiting for, someone else to do it. So thank you so much. And I know that will inspire so many people. And I'm glad that you also mentioned, kind of you hinted at the idea that people think there's no police brutality in Canada because, it's not highlighted a lot. It's not talked about. It's not given the same attention because it's incompatible with kind of this perception that people have of Canada and Canadian society. So within the legal context, I wonder off the top of your head, if you could kind of give us some examples of how Canadian law continues to promote white supremacy and perpetuate violence against Black and Indigenous people.
Yeah, a legal example specifically, one of the research projects that I undertook last year for an independent study was because I'm located at UCLA, most of my study is of United States law, but I did an independent study comparing approaches to race consciousness in criminal law. And so really taking a look at the GLADU factors and how those are implemented across the different provinces, and seeing if there was any lessons there or possibilities for shifts in the American law context. And I was, really stunned, again, I don't know as much about Canadian law as I do American law, but I was really stunned at the way that the provinces have so much leeway to interpret what these factors that are meant to support a sort of race conscious remediation scheme. They have so much leeway to interpret their own version of how that should be implemented that it makes the remedial measures almost for naught.
Mm.
And I think, it is so Canadian because people point to the GLADU factors and the GLADU courts to be like, look how great Canada is,
Yeah.
and it's something that doesn't exist in the United States. And in comparisons that have been published, there'll be this kind of, wow, Canada is so wonderful. The United States, it's so not. But I think looking deeper into what the actual impacts are of those laws tell us a little bit of something about how Canada operates both legally in the legal realm and socially. Canada really likes to present itself as this bastion of justice, as this peaceful place, but really it does everything that it can to preserve and protect the structures that harm Indigenous people and Black people, and the judiciary is a really big part of that. And then of course there is the other ways that the criminal legal system works together to impact Black and Indigenous people in particular, through policing and through incarceration. And though, Statistics Canada continues to fail us in collecting the same sort of data that we have in the United States, which again is one of the ways that Canadian anti-Blackness works, is that it will not look. Canada refuses to look and investigate. We know that those issues are issues in Canada as well, as a result of academics who are doing the research to make up for where Statistics Canada fails. And so, those are two major issues, or three, I think I just mentioned: incarceration, policing, the way that the criminal legal system is set up. And then finally, one of the things that I think is a huge issue is the lack of access to information that we have in Canada. We do not have the right to get a certain amount of information that has to do with the criminal legal system. And when you compare that to the United States, the problem in Canada is far larger. And so what I'm talking about here is when someone is harmed by police, so Jermaine Carby being killed by Officer Ryan Reed, we didn't have Ryan Reed's name until a full 2 years later after it happened. And only because there was an inquest into what happened. We, the family and the public, do not have the right to get information about the police officer who's involved. And we certainly don't have the right to get information about whether or not that police officer has had in negative interactions with the public in the past, or questionable interactions with the public in the past. That is something that people in the United States get easily, you know? And I think that, you know, if this is supposed to be a public service, why would it be one of the only public services in which we are not able to get this sort of information? And journalists will tell you, you know, even when they try to file freedom of information requests, they're often denied, and police will cite privacy legislation that has been written sort of vaguely and doesn't actually say that it does not apply to the police. And so I think that that's an area that is prime for a test case, because I think we should establish the right to that information in Canada. So if anyone's, you know, out there listening and is practicing law in Canada, like really do think about that. And that's something that, you know, I'm hoping that organizations like the Black Legal Action Center will take some steps towards challenging.
Wow, you bring up some really good issues, you know, lack of accountability for police officers and police forces, and lack of access to information. But also, you know, how it sounds good to, you know, have these reports, are the Supreme Court, you know, the Gladue report, R.V. Morris, where it's like, oh, we're making change and we're leaders in addressing racism in the justice system. But in reality, there are a lot of barriers to these programs being implemented or to even be considered. And the impact of these programs, not only on the justice system, but also on the individuals that have to participate in, you know, creating these reports. And also a lot of times the prosecutors opt not to even do it because it's more time to do it. And it might end up that, well, the time that it takes, and it's an overburdened system with not a lot of investment in resources. So a lot of times they just opt not to do it. So there's a lot of issues with that. So it might sound good on paper, but if you interrogate it, you'll see that, or you have to ask yourself if it's really creating any form of change. Were you going to add something?
No, I just said exactly.
Okay, perfect. So I see the time is about to expire, and I know you made a specific time commitment. So I guess I'll ask one last question. Do you think Black liberation can be achieved through legal institutions? Or do you think these institutions have to be changed or abolished and creating new systems? I know that's kind of a vague but big question, but we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, I don't think that liberation can be achieved through legal institutions. I am one of those people who believes that the legal system and legal institutions reflect society. As much as, you know, judges and the legal system will say, you know, like we're unaffected by politics, or we are unaffected by society, and we're the letter of the law. That is not true. You know, the legal system changes along with society. And when society pushes forward and says, you know, we want this to change, that forces either politicians to change the law or forces judges who are publishing their opinions to be like, do I really want my name attached to this? Or am I gonna write an opinion in a different way? And we see it throughout centuries of jurisprudence going all the way back to the United Kingdom, in the United States, in Australia, in South Africa. It is everywhere. The legal system follows social movements. And so I think that the legal system is something that we can look at as a reflection of where we are. And it is something that we absolutely need people working in to ensure that what little advances can be made, what little protections can be made to protect individuals and systems. Absolutely, we still need people there doing that work. So don't get me wrong on that. I believe that. I'm not an absolutist who thinks like, screw it and leave it and just do something else, because I think paying careful attention, you can see how conservatives have used the legal system to chip away at rights over the years. And you can see how legal systems have been used to really harm people. And so we need people who are progressive and who have abolitionist and liberationist ideas working within the system. I believe that. But I don't think the system is going to bring us there. I think the system is a reflection. And so it is absolutely critical that those of us who are engaged in liberation work, abolitionist work, and to find that to be central to what we do, we must be linked in with social movements who are focused on pushing society forward so that the law can change along with it.
Wow, I kind of appreciate how you kind of put it. It's not one or the other, but necessarily that they can work together, but at the core, it's the people, it's the movements, it's the grassroots activism that's going to challenge these systems and force them to change, not necessarily. And when it comes to the change, then the people inside can facilitate it in a way that's not tokenizing. But if the system in and of itself or by itself won't change without the corresponding kind of pressure. And I think we can see that throughout, what happened in 2020 and beyond, where, it was the grassroots activism, it was the people on the ground marching that really sparked this social change. And then everyone else kind of reacted to it. The business community started putting out their diversity plans and appointing all these Black people as head of chief diversity and inclusion, et cetera, et cetera. But, without that initial push by people on the ground and our social movements, then none of all of these other tokenizing things, the value of them is debatable, would not have happened. And, some good has come from it, of course, but it's in response to the people on the ground, not necessarily these organizations and companies deciding they wanted to do better. It was that they had to do better because people on the ground were demanding it. So I think that was such a good way to end our conversation today on the value of collective organizing and solidarity in advancing social change. So thank you so much, Sandy. It was such a pleasure speaking with you.
It's my pleasure, always a pleasure to be in conversation with you, Sony. Thank you so much.